It's all
Hey.
yours, brother.
All right. Good evening, everybody. What a great pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm a recovering alcoholic. My name is Mitchell. Hi, Linda. Hey, Curdy. Um, AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. Um, Really, that's from the 12 and 12, uh, the other great text in our program. I when I spoke with Eric today, we had a beautiful conversation, and one of the things that kind of came out of our conversation was um, talking about that the big book and the literature is a treasure and a treasure map, um, and that how both of us and me have come to understand that in the literature, which is very deep and rich, it points and invites us to seek beyond the literature to the spiritual sources that where um, a lot of this came from. And so what that kind of led me to thinking about today really was, one thing that we talked about was what is it, in my experience, to gain access to this power, to this experience that separated me from alcohol. And what does that look like for me? And what have those experiences been like to me? I'm sober a long time, got sober in New York, March 6th, 1985. And I only mention that because it's been a long, glorious experience to be on this path. And um, and so I didn't understand that I was being driven to drink. I just drank. I didn't understand that I had a condition of the mind that was driving me to behave like a robot. I reacted to life, I reacted to drinking. I didn't understand this obsession of the mind, which I had was creating, interfering, obstructing my life. And I was not happily and usefully whole. I was in a state of self-destruction and a perpetrator of disharmony, even though I didn't want to be. So I drank against my will and I acted against my will, and I didn't understand what was driving me. And I did not have access. What I had access to was I have a big supply of alcohol and drugs on a frequent basis. I had a lot of access to that. I had a lot of access to that, but I had no understanding of what was going on in me. And so when I came into AA in New York, um, what started to happen to me before I even was introduced to the literature was I started to experience a transmission of energy and love from people in AA. And when I got sober, it was not a warm and fuzzy sobriety world, and it was a pretty direct world of sobriety. And the men and women who, and I didn't really understand. I was like a burn victim who didn't know they were burnt when I came into AA. I was in so much chaos. My mind was out of control. I didn't understand how I ended up where I ended up. I just, you know, I ended up in an AA meeting at the 79th Street workshop, 10 o'clock at night. Um, and I heard a woman share who was completely different than me. I'm not going to really go into a drunkalog tonight, but I will tell you, I drank feverishly and drugged feverishly for many years. And I heard a woman who was a periodic alcoholic share about the despair she felt and the loneliness she felt and the confusion she felt of why she kept on drinking and couldn't stop. And and I experienced her. I identified with both the condition that she had and I identified with the feeling she had. And somehow at that moment, I cracked. And that was the first moment of grace in my life. I have no idea. I just cracked open. I didn't understand what identification meant, but what happened to me was I threw myself on the mercy of AA. An energy took over me, And if you knew me, you knew I was an arrogant guy, know-it-all, and not really interested in what you had to say, interested in what I had to say. And next thing you know, I'm attending AA meetings without any logic. It wasn't like I decided all of a sudden, oh, I'm going to start attending AA. I was moved into AA. I just started going to AA meetings. And as people who in New York know, there's, I don't know, 13, 1400 meetings a day. And so I found myself going to AA meetings kind of like a lost soul and really crippled inside, frightened all the time, insecure all the time, but a big persona. Um, and for some reason, my spirit said yes to AA. I still, and I understand this only as those moments of grace. And when I came into AA, what did I get? I didn't understand I was gaining an experience and access to this collective intelligence and to the elders who helped me, who showed me so much love, sometimes brutally tough love, but often just love. And I didn't even understand that I was starting to feel um, like a little bit warm near the fire. And very early in my sobriety, I was grabbed to do service. A guy came up to me at Templeton, and he said to me, uh, we don't tell a lot of people about this opportunity, but we see you as a kind of a special kind of guy, and so we'd like you to make the coffee, but don't tell anybody that we told you because we find this to be only special people who come in. We like to give this to. It's a special privilege, and we see something very special in you. So we'd like you to make the coffee. So, like, my life was a quest for special treatment. So that's all I needed was to be told I'm special. I have a unique gift. And so I was maybe 45 days sober. I'm at Templeton, and now I'm now I'm like a caterer now. I'm buying cookies from Dean and DeLuca. I'm putting out a spread in AA. I'm making Cuban coffee that makes people run to the bathroom. Yeah, I mean, I'm spending three-quarters of the money and this is 100-person meeting on cookies and sweets and coffee and but it got me to the meeting and when I came into AA, I had just finished running away from the police. I was indicted by a federal grand jury for all the shit I was in. I was broken. My drinking had taken me to a place where the drinking no longer worked. My guts were gone. I had faced a grand jury. They didn't put me in jail, which they could have done. And so I came to AA looking older than I am today and broken. And just the drinking no longer even worked for me. I drank a drink. I got drunk. I drank 10 drinks. I was just shaking. My hands were, I lost my family. I was broken into pieces. My guts were like a Ritz crackers you squeeze. That's how much was left of me. So I didn't, it's funny. My first experience in this was this service where I just thought to, kind of get involved. And so I was gaining access to what was I gaining? I was gaining access to the love in AA. That's what it was. It was very simple. There was a sense of feeling warm, feeling connected, feeling like I was a guy who then wanted to get an A in AA because I was a failure in life. So I felt this energy take over me. And I just started going to a couple of meetings a day for a couple of years and I had some lunatics helping me at first. I attracted some crazy guys, some sponsors first, and I was attending meetings and my head was going nuts. The self-criticism in my head, the living in the future, living in the past. I was tormented because, as we know, when we come into AA, and we're released and separated from the booze, now we're stuck with the condition in the mind, which I didn't even know I had a condition in the mind, other than the condition had me. And so I just was tormented. I was a tormented guy. I just could not stop thinking. I didn't understand that this was the nature of the condition, of the mind that's out of control, the mind that's just driving me, that's giving me stories and narratives and expressing itself. And I'm thinking about it and I'm being driven by it. I'm reacting to my thinking, my interpretations of life. I just was in complete chaos. And when I got and of course I had so many problems when I came into AA, and so I got involved with these groups, the PAX group in New York, a men's group which has been around for 75 years, and the 79th Street Workshop, and the Manhattan group and Templeton. And I just started going to meetings. And at first, I couldn't even read the big book. I couldn't think. But the first person who introduced me to the big book was Sister Maurice, this tough nun who looked like George Patton. She was a tough gal. Oh, she was a tough gal. And she came up to me at a meeting and she said, you're a very sick young man. I said, yeah. And I wanted to say, no shit, Sherlock. You know what I mean? And I may have said that, but she could have broken me like a pretzel. She was so tough. And she grabbed me and she said to me, she gave me a copy of the big book and she told me to read, 86 towards 88. She says, your mind is so screwed up that you need to fill your mind with something before you can start thinking. You need to read this thing. And so I just read it, and it led me into kind of a praying. And I had been a spiritual seeker most of my life, drunk, but I started to pray, and I found the spirit kind of doing weird shit to me. Like I started laying on my back like a dog with my hands open. I started to pray, and I started to get in touch with the fear and anxiety in me when I prayed. I was just getting quiet was terrifying for me, but I was doing it, and I was at that point. Kurt and I always talk about how sobriety is stage specific. You go through all these stages, and I had been through a religious education, but I didn't think about God once until I was put in a jail cell. The guy almost killed me. That was the first time I think I prayed. I'd been to preacher school 3 days a week for years, and I never thought about a higher power God once. I mean, it's strange to say that. And so when I came into AA, I was open. I don't know what it was. I did not have a prejudice against this experience. And so when Sister Claire told me to say some prayers, the Serenity Prayer, read the 12, read the big book, and just fill my head with something that was not my thinking, and that helped me in that beginning. I had to I was so out of control mentally, and I was so overreactive and reacting strongly and interpreting things like people are criticizing me, they're judging me. I was just my mind was all over the place with self-criticism and self-hatred, and I was a mess. And so I started going through the 12 steps with a couple guys. Guy, I don't know if he's still alive. Beautiful guy named Tommy Burtis. He's probably sober, 55 years. Tommy H. And then I started to kind of, have I started to gain access to that experience in prayer where I started to experience some kind of strength inside. And I had a ferocious resentment when I got into AA with an old buddy of mine. And somebody gave me the prayer, bless that person with goodness. Oh, Tom's still around. That's great. Um, bless it. The prayer in the big book, there's different versions of it. This could be, bless someone with all what you want, give them a peace beyond their understanding. And somebody in AA came up to me and told me to say that prayer. And and I said that prayer. I was probably sober 90 days, 4 months. And I had so much anger towards this buddy Bobby of mine. I found myself 2 months later standing in front of him without any anger at all. And it blew my mind. I didn't even know what to say about it. And so I knew something happened. I was almost embarrassed by praying. I was almost embarrassed by getting on my knees. I was embarrassed by the whole thing. But I knew something had happened. And then I ended up in this group of AAs. It was a defrocked priest and a nun who had the hots for me. I ended up in a spiritual development group. I don't know what the hell. I was being led to these very odd places where I was sitting here and hearing people talk about the spirit. And so I started to pray and I started to read. And I had been a meditator, but I was too anxious to meditate. And as I went through the 12 steps, I started to, because my early understanding of the steps is not what it is today, but I started to experience not in the fifth step really any big release, but when I got to the ninth step and the eighth and ninth step, that's when I felt I had a real spiritual awakening. That was the beginning of having an awakening, where I experienced the promise that um, the pain of the past, the all the pain and remorse of the past could be lifted, and that was I made an amends to the woman of my had my kids, my first child, and was up in California, and I made an amend to her, and she looked at me and said, "Well, I wish you were this man when you were with me." And I remember driving down the coast of California. I got off on this spot on the coast and on a rock, and I felt kind of shot into a new dimension. I just felt free, and I didn't understand what happened, but I was experiencing the direct experience of the spirit working in my life and the steps working in my life, and I began to have a faith in the fact that this would work. And and as a spiritual seeker, I'd always been, reading different kinds of literature and been open to different kind of spiritual paths. And at one point, I got led to a monastery up in upstate New York called Graymore, and and uh, and I met Father Jack. And I was a Jewish Buddhist, so I wasn't a Catholic guy. I know more about Catholic mysticism than Catholics do, but I got brought up to this monastery. I didn't know anybody. I was at a meeting. Somebody mentioned Graymore. This guy named Vinny. Anybody knows him? Vinny said I was either going to be a priest or a pornographer in my life. I wasn't sure which direction I'm going in. He said at the Al-Anon house. Anybody knows the Al-Anon house? He was speaking at the Al-Anon house. He mentions Graymore. I don't know shit from Shanola. I walk up to him and he tells me about Graymore, and I go to Graymore by myself. I took a train up to Peekskill. The spirit led me up there, and there I met my spiritual friend and director, Sister Claire Murphy, and Father Joe, and um, and I started to kind of have this interior experience. I went up there, and I was so scared because my conception or experience of a higher power at that time was like when I prayed, I shot a hook up to the power, and I connected to God and to Source. And when I stopped praying, I was alone by myself, and that was my experience. And I was living in all this anxiety, constant anxiety, and when I met Sister Claire, we would pray together, and I never prayed together with anybody, and we would sit together, and she would open up a verse of the Bible, or a piece of poetry, and I'd spend a day of Graymore being quiet, and I was going through the terror of getting connected to the chaos within me, and then I started having some of those experiences where I didn't even know it, but I was gaining access to this interior life. And I was feeling connected to this energy, this source energy, and I was feeling the love. Because for me, the bridge to the spiritual life has been the love of others. That's been the bridge. That's been the inspiration. That has what's woken up my heart, is the love of other alcoholics and people in AA. That's what and I just started. I was very fortunate, because when I grew up in AA, there was a lot of wonderful people there who, this guy Hal Rosenberg, these people who just, you know, um, transmitted things to me, sometimes with a handshake, sometimes with a hand on my shoulder, sometimes with a conversation. I would share about a problem I have. The next thing you know, they're helping me. I just started feeling this love. And as I was filled with this love, something started happening within me. I didn't understand any of it, and I was going through the steps. I was now very involved in service. And I had a big moment where I was tormented and still a bit nutty. And I went on a retreat, and the priest said, I want you to say a prayer because no amount of self centeredness will be cured by just getting what you want. You need to learn what it means to be selfless, what that experience is, to give without wanting anything back. You need to have an experience of what that means. And he gave me a prayer, which was, God, please use me today. I'm available. And I said that prayer within a week. I was some crazy guy from the special forces asked me to sponsor him. I didn't know if the guy wanted to kill me or what. I met him. He was wearing his fatigues, and he was, and I started getting involved with with being a sponsor, and I didn't know what the hell. And my sponsor said to me, "Well, you're sober about you don't know too much, but love this guy up, take him through as many of the steps as you can. If you don't understand it, we'll get together and I'll help you too. We'll do it together." And so I started to kind of, have these experiences inside myself where I was open and my life changed. I was a bum and a wild man, and uh, through the path of recovery, I ended up going back to school, getting a profession, getting a family, having kids, and I started to live the program, um, and I started to experience the releases and the surrenders that come from more awakeness, more awareness, and and my heart changed. You know, not all of my perceptions changed. I didn't have the same level of awarenesses I have now, but I began slowly to see through and understand. And then the beauty of the big book is how the big book has, if someone, unlocks the meaning of the big book for you, you begin to understand what self-will means and selfishness and that. And you hear a lot of bullshit in AA that makes no sense at all, that I'm self-centered to the core, I'm this, I'm that. You hear a lot of misinformation in AA, but I began to understand that this selfishness and this bondage of self was this thinking that was unrelenting, that I was absolutely powerless over, and I didn't understand that. I tried to manage my thinking with Louise Hay and metaphysical readings and affirmations, and that was the best I could do, and it was okay, it was okay. I was trying to control my way into peace of mind. I was, and that was okay. That was the best I could do. And I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that. And I remember when I did a fifth step with Tommy and Tommy Burtis, and I had a big awakening with him where he said to me, "You're not responsible for what you did when you drank, but you're accountable for what you did." And that opened the door for me to begin to understand, to be released from the guilt and the shame of thinking that it was my fault that I drank, that I had some kind of control over my thoughts, over my drinking, and that I was under the delusion that by going to meetings, that was what was getting me sober, and the sponsor was getting me sober. And I didn't understand that I was released from this condition. And I began to see that I just began to have a little bit of clarity, about, and, gaining access is, like it says in the book, what would life be without faith? Well, what started to accumulate for me was a sense of knowing that I could trust the power. First, the power was in AA, in the energy in the meetings, and then I could start to trust some of the people. And then I started having those personal experiences where I was waking up, and when my son was born, I remember, I was probably sober about 7 years, and he's a redhead, and I remember getting up at night and waking up 2 in the morning and taking his little body and putting his heart on mine and rocking in the chair and putting him to sleep and having these experiences where I was exploding into joy and a sense of love for this little guy, and so my heart started to get awakened and in ways through these relationships, because at the end of the day, how we interact with people, our capacity to get along, our capacity to respond with kindness, be able to see the difference between what's driving us. These are all gifts and graces that happen. And so I started to have experience where I was kind of woken up to this heart-centered experience. And then one of the, and one of the things that, I mean, I've had a lot of wonderful people love me into health. I've been loved into health. I've experienced so much love in AA and so much kindness in AA that I can never say thank you enough for it. But then when I got to the sixth and seventh step, my initial understanding of it was, you know, I'm going to change myself. Now I know the patterns and the behavior, and now I'm going to change it myself. And that was what a lot of people at the meeting say. I'm going to drop the rock. I don't know. So I'm not going to drop the rock. But that's where I started to have awareness. I started to see in front of me the thinking process. I started to see in my mind what was driving me. I could have awarenesses of how my mind was beginning to interpret things a little bit at a time. And problems with anger, which I had a lot of anger, pretty savage anger I had. I started to all of a sudden be released and by it. I mean, at one point, I was walking down the street in New York, and somebody gave me the shoulder on on Broadway during like noon, and the anger that welled up in me was so intense. I thought I was gonna have a heart attack, and I called my sponsor up. This one to a telephone booth, this crazy, crazy cat named Jack Kelly, and I told Jack, man, what happened? And And Jack said, man, that's the kind of anger that'll give you a heart attack, brother. And I'm on the phone with him. He says, I want you to say a prayer with me. I said, what is it, Jack? God, please remove the sword of my anger. Where does this shit come from? Like, so this guy's, and it wasn't just the words, but it was the energy coming through. And so I used to say, so all of a sudden I found myself, you know, um, at a certain point without that level of anger and rage and like and so well, why I'm saying this is because we all have to have our own personal knowing of the truth of this. I'm not someone who believes you can borrow my higher power. I don't know where that shit came from either. I don't know if you can borrow anybody's higher power, but I started to have, like it talks in the book, this what would life be without faith? And then life meets us, right, with all these different kinds of conditions. And now I'm going through the steps, and now I'm learning to live more effectively in 10, 11, and 12, and but I'm starting to kind of have those experiences where I'm being changed. And, and so life changed, my life changed. I don't know. I started to become a force for good in the world. That's all. Simple, not complicated. I started to take personal responsibility, for my life. Um, and start to feel the gratitude of cherishing this life, which I was not a grateful guy coming in here. These different experiences where our heart awakens, where we start to see things differently, and then and so life happens, and so um, the healing happens, the heart heals, the perception changes. Now, when I didn't like my father, you know what I mean? My mother was, I'm from intergenerational alcoholism, and my father was a rageaholic, and and I had that experience when when my folks, um, when I took care of my folks when they died. I was at peace with my father, peace with my mother, and if you knew how I felt about my father, I want to put my fist through his face half the time I knew him. And my heart had changed. Um, I now had an understanding and an appreciation of that reality that what he did, he wasn't doing to me on purpose. I got that, you know, I got that. I really got it in my soul that he was a wounded guy, um, and my mom was wounded, and um, and it's a gift to have that acceptance. That acceptance is not an act of the will, but it's an act of the act of forgiveness, and these forgiveness experiences are part of the revelation that we're lifted out of that bondage. And and so I remember I was with my dad towards the end of his life, and I remember one time I went to the assisted living facility, and I put him in his pajamas, tucked him in, and he said to me, cookie before I go to bed. I said, okay. So I gave him an Oreo. He loved Oreos. He cracked the Oreo open, started licking out the middle of it, and I put the covers on, tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and put him to bed. And you know, to understand how things change in our hearts and our souls is, the gift that gave me, and the gift of loving my dad and being able to have him love me back in the way he was, and to help his transition. And the same thing with my mom. these are experiences that gave me so much gratitude, that made me feel so deeply. It's even hard to even describe the gratitude of being able to be at peace. And my wife almost died of cancer when she, when I was sober about 10, 12 years. And life met me, right? And and the principles and the inspiration that I'd experienced from other people who'd walk through AIDS and all kind of horrible shit with grace and humor, those are the people that inspired me. And I was able, with the grace of the power, to meet life. My sponsor said, "We're not giving you a ticker tape parade because you're." I said, "Okay, I got it, but do good and don't talk about it, man. Just show up." And the energy brought me to those places. I didn't all of a sudden decide how to behave. I didn't have a 10-point plan on behavior modification. My perceptions, my heart was changing and changing. And I was now all the way in life and participating in life and doing what could do the best to bring kindness to others. You know, and then my other kid was born. I got married. I'm married 33 years, which is a miracle that she's been with me for 33 years because I'm not an easy guy to get along with all the time. But I continued to, go through the steps. And then I had to kind of move it along, really. One of the wonderful things that has happened to me is that I've always been led to people who could open up of understanding and love and sobriety to me. And that has always continued. And then maybe about 5 years ago, I had cancer and open heart surgery, and within a couple of years, and life met me there. And by the grace of God, I don't know, I was at peace. I don't know. I don't know. I just had peace. I had peace going through it. And I met my buddy Curdy Boy, and my buddy Curdy Boy kind of opened up the mystical dimension of the Big Book to me, which was a grace. And I began to really understand the simplicity of the sober condition of alcoholism. Like, we don't really talk about the sober condition a lot. We always talk about it in the past, as if the condition of alcoholism was before we got into AA. Now that we're not drinking, we're not dealing with it anymore. And it's not the sober condition that's centered in our mind. And what the hell does that even mean? And um, so I started to really kind of awaken to a different dimension of sight and awareness. And I began to see, um, not just through prayer and meditation, but through the gift of awareness, what the Big Book was saying more. And we talk a lot about this, we talk a lot about that phrase. We talk about it every week, the self that's creating the narrative, the storyline that's driving us beyond our understanding, and that we're powerless over it. And then all of a sudden, there are moments of clarity where it lands that I'm not my thinking. I'm more than that. And that, again, the language of the heart takes over, and that there's an experience of life directly where I have access to the great reality within me. That it says it can be found deep within me. And we don't apologize to anybody for our faith in a higher power. That all of a sudden, that sense of, I don't know, there was just a sense of stability, a sense of cherishing life, a sense of gratitude that just gets unlocked. And it's like a spring that gets found. And when that opens up, life can never be the same. And there's no more need to practice gratitude lists. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but all of a sudden, I'm seeing a deeper truth. And I'm experiencing access. Um, and that willingness just continues. Um, I'm going to kind of complete with this. It's interesting. Part of the joy of sobriety is the multi-dimension level of awakeness and healing. And there's a psychological healing dimension to sobriety. There's there's um, waking up intellectual dimension, which is more clarity. There's a physical element. There's the emotional body. There are all these different bodies that wake up, and one of the great joys of being, as Mary T calls it, a seasoned beginner in AA, is that that I wake up to a deeper level of the shared humanity that I have with others, because that's partly what I gained access to, is this level of shared humanity with everyone, this feeling of being part of it all, not being any different, any better, any worse, that feeling of connectedness to all of you and to the life. And and so, I don't know, about a couple of weeks ago, um, I realized I had this awareness about this power struggle that I've had with my wife for a long time, and it's been around money. Um, and I realized that I wasn't being transparent with her about some of the money I saved. And it wasn't anything like I had a girlfriend on the side and I was doing anything sneaky with it. But all of a sudden I realized, like, a conversation I had with someone, that the condition centered in my mind and the narrative I had about my wife, which was around, if I tell her about this, she's going to try to manage and control me, and she's going to try to limit me, and she kind of and that I was actually trying to protect myself against the imagined threat of how she was going to react to me, and it blew my mind that this is how I was seeing it, and that I realized that I owed her an amend. Um, and all of a sudden kind of looked at this thing. I realized that the narrative that I had since I'm a kid, because when you grow up in alcoholism, um, the way I did, um, I didn't trust people too much. I was trying to protect myself. I was always called like a weird guy. I'm a jazz musician. I'm a writer. You're weird. I was always told weird, and I was always feeling that I was being controlled by people, and I felt like I was being controlled by her, honestly, in some ways, which was a delusion. And all of a sudden, I just woke up and I realized, man, this has just been a narrative, the condition of my mind, which has now the unconscious has woken up, and I can see the truth of it. And when I saw the truth of it, um, I realized I owed her an amend, for how I'd different times had reacted to her and how I had contributed in some ways to her feeling less emotionally safe, at times with the way I interpreted her behavior. And I made amends to her yesterday on it. And and I couldn't tell you how grateful I am, because my intention is never to harm another human being, ever. Sobriety is my covenant to the spirit, is to go to any lengths, any lengths, do whatever I have to do to not harm another human being in this life. And it was a very powerful, loving conversation. And as happens in the ninth step, we give the dignity to give someone a voice. We show them the dignity to acknowledge the harm that we've done, and we allow the truth to come up, and with a sincerity and a willingness to be changed. And after being here a long time, um, I am so graced by this willingness. It's a gift from God to have this enthusiastic determination and willingness to be involved in AA, because I love AA. I'd be dead in a jail cell without it. Killed a few people driving. And I'm so surrounded by goodness and love. And I live a life that is purpose and meaning, and I do my best to contribute in any way I can to other people's well-being. And so I've gained access to that that place within. That's where the power is. It's not out there. Gain access to deep awareness of deeper truths. And there's more to come, really. And so I'm very grateful to be here with all of you, and thanks for letting me share.